This is the Sports as a Metaphor for Life, focusing on youth football safety presentation by Bryce Butcher, Chris Lyle, and Isabel Otero. To break down what we are going to talk about during this presentation, Chris will be focusing on the introduction, the problem at hand, and some supporting information, including sport history and youth football. I will be focusing on the thesis, some supporting information focusing on sport and exercise psychology in youth football and motor development in youth football, and Bryce will be taking care of the counter-arguments and conclusion.
So a little bit about the introduction. Obviously, safety has been one of the biggest growing concerns for American football in the last decade. When it comes to children, safety is even more important due to their undeveloped physical and psychological parts of the body. The brain being the most important and susceptible to injury is the main worry for parents and medical professionals. New studies, rule changes, and implementations come out to try and make this sport as safe as possible, but are they effective? Should youth football be wiped out completely, or should there be some kind of age restriction?
Our group's thesis is that the negative effects of youth football outweighs the positive. We can see this through sport and exercise psychology, sport history, and motor development. As a group, we don't necessarily think that football shouldn't be played at a young age, but there are many other options that we're going to talk about further on.
When it comes to children, safety is even more important due to their undeveloped physical and psychological parts of the body. The brain being the most important and susceptible to injury is the main worry for parents and medical professionals. New studies, rule changes, and implementations come out to try and make this sport as safe as possible, but are they effective? Should youth football be wiped out completely, or should there be some kind of age restriction? For our thesis, we came to an agreement that the negative effects of playing youth football outweigh the positives. There are a ton of cases in the NFL that prove it is a very dangerous sport for the best of the best. Those are people that have played all of their lives and have fully developed brains. CTE has taken over the health talks when it comes to football, and for good reason. I don't necessarily believe that this means we should get rid of youth football completely. I think it's an amazing sport that every kid should get the chance to play like I did. There are some other options like flag football where there's little to no contact at all. The kids would still be able to learn the game and be active without taking any hits that could change their bodies for the rest of their lives. There could also be an age restriction to get the kids to understand the game more before they are out there playing. This does take away from hands-on learning, although, because the best way to learn something is usually by just doing it. At the end of the day, the physical contact that kids are enduring in football is not good for them in the moment and even down the road. The development of a kid's body and brain is vital for them to reach their full potential. Some cases can cause serious long-term damage to children and lead to poor impulse control and brain issues. The most recent case from the NFL that shows a player with poor impulse control is Richard Sherman, who is believed to have CTE. A couple of years ago, the Super Bowl winning quarterback went to his father-in-law's home where he started banging on the door while making vulgar comments. This is just one scenario, but there are many that are similar to it, and it's a big reason why safety in football is such a big topic as of right now.
When looking into the effects of sport and exercise psychology in youth football, the National Library of Medicine states a mismatch in sports readiness and skill development can lead to anxiety, stress, and ultimately attrition for young athletes. This study specifically looked into the effects of youth sports, football, soccer, and baseball, on young athletes who face a deficit in sport readiness and skill development. It also looked into the negative impacts and inherent risk of injury for athletes of all ages when participating in sport. A quote from the National Library of Medicine states, "With increased youth participation in sports, an increase in sports-related injury has been observed, with 2.6 million emergency room visits each year for those aged 5 to 24. According to the National Library of Medicine, youths in sports are often hasty to return to their sport post-injury, and, quote, a hasty return to sport with incomplete rehabilitation can result in chronic pain, dysfunction, increased time away from sport, and repeated injury to the same or different body parts. Another statistic from the National Library of Medicine states, despite the fact that 67% of injuries occur during practice sessions, many parents enforce fewer safety precautions during these times than during competition. This means that during practice, more parents are telling their kids to just shake it off and get back out on the field, when that can cause a lot of physical trauma and damage to the body of an adolescent. This study concludes that while youth sports can be beneficial, changes need to be made to the sport to decrease the amount of injuries of young athletes per year. When focusing on motor development and its influence on youth football, the National Library of Medicine conducted a study over a 6-month period to research if a football training program could influence or improve cognitive and motor skills within adolescents. According to the National Library of Medicine, football exercise programs resulted in improving running coordination and explosive leg strength performances, as well as shorter visual discrimination times in children regularly attending football courses compared with their peers. While this study proves that the football exercise programs can positively affect motor development skills, this doesn't account for the physical trauma that football can cause, as I talked about on the last slide.
There are some counter-arguments that go towards youth football so that the players can still play football while they are young. The first counter-argument is that youth flag football should be played instead of youth tackle football. This can have significantly less amount of head injuries in their practices and games. This is mainly because they're not tackling each other to the ground compared to just grabbing the flags that are used to simulate a tackle in flag football. Since 2015, flag football has become more and more popular with kids ages ranging from 6 to 12 years old. Since then, the sport has increased about 38% among youth athletes. Flag football is much more safer than youth tackle football, mainly because it focuses on endurance, strength, hand-eye coordination, as well as speed and agility. Another counter-argument is that coaches in youth tackle football leagues can go to clinics and learn better ways to prevent injuries in practices and in games. They can then teach their players so that they have a better understanding of what the correct way to play the sport is, as well as keeping themselves and the other opponents on the field safe at all times. Also, coaches and league officials can come together and think of new rule changes that they can use to protect players in games. Another argument that could be used is that players could start playing tackle football at a higher age instead of starting when they're such young ages. This would also correlate with playing youth flag football. Starting tackle football at older ages will lead to players developing the correct skills that they're going to need to play the sport, which will then later on help them by lowering the player's risk of injuries in practices and in games. As a result, we as a group believe that the negative effects of youth football outweigh the positives that come out of the sport. There have been a lot of cases and studies that have been made that concussions and brain damage are caused at such young ages and keep deteriorating the brain as the players get older. Even though more and more people are coming up with better and safer ways to practice the sport of football, there are always going to be a small chance that head injury or normal injury could occur. The best substitute that we came up with would be for young athletes to start playing flag football. The studies show that the risk of injury is significantly less, and this will also give players much more time to gain knowledge and develop their skills on how they can safely participate in games and practices in the sport of football.